All right, we are live, everybody. Welcome to our preliminary discussion on our read-along of Wars of Light and Shadow by Janny Wurts. So this is a very exciting day for me. I've been looking forward to this tremendously. And for the purpose of this read-along, we have assembled a quest group like no other. We have here today with us the foremost barbarian warrior of BookTube, who prefers, like Beowulf, to slay monsters with his bare hands, using a technique that he calls jujitsu. He's mentioned it a few times on his channel, I think.
Just a couple.
The one and only Newtman.
Newtman, I like it. That's a new I've not heard that one before.
Newtman. So Jimmy, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I feel like we've been working on getting this read along going for quite some time. People have been asking me for months, when is it happening? Is it happening? Well, it is happening. This is the debut, the preliminary discussion, as Philip said, and I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. It is great to have you, Newtman. And we also have here, with an H that is silent but deadly, the one and only assassin elf of BookTube, Joe Ariel. Hello, Joe Ariel.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this read along, and hopefully we can answer some questions people have.
Good. So I'll just fix your name here. Don't forget, everybody, the H is silent. So.
Because clearly she kills people with the silent H. It's the invisible weapon.
It is very stabby, I think.
You never hear it coming.
Never hear it coming. And of course, how could we possibly leave out the nemesis to end all nemesises? The diabolical, nefarious genius. The one and only wizard of BookTube, Lord Fireballs.
It's somewhat appropriate that you start off, you've cast me in this evil light, when clearly the prologue of Curse of the Mistwraith points out that you always have to be careful about who is giving you the information about who is good and who is evil.
Well, you see, there you have already a display of his genius. He's already working on your minds, people. Do not listen.
He's showing off one hand and doing something with the other,
Exactly. So beware. So that is our quest group. Oh, and also because every quest group needs somebody useless, I'm here too. So I guess I will be Chaser the Bard. I'll be the bard.
All right.
The whistling bard.
Some quality whistling, honestly.
He does have a good whistle.
It's a strong whistle.
He has vibrato on it and everything.
There. So
that was excellent. Not gonna lie.
It's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Can I get a little applause for that?
Well, hang on. We'll do a round of applause.
No, let's give him a wave.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, with that, and how could I possibly not introduce the one and only, the author herself of the Wars of Light and Shadow? We are joined today by none other than Janny Wurts herself. Hello, Janny, and welcome.
Thank you. Says the author who can't even make the damn camera work.
Well, your voice is the most important thing at the moment. Although I know you got yourself nice and ready for this, but we'll just all imagine what you look like all ready and presented for this wonderful occasion. We are very, very excited to have you here to discuss in a non-spoiler way. By the way, everybody, this is non-spoiler today. We are just doing a sort of a setup for this read along, which is going to be happening. We are going to be reading every other month. So one book 2 months. So we're going to take it at a stately pace because this is a series that is incredibly rich. It is a lot going on. It is one of the greatest epic fantasies of all time, and it deserves the attention of this read along. I hope everyone will agree. And so our first discussion, I will be announcing when we have it, spoiler discussion on Curse of the Mistwraith will be happening in perhaps a month or so. We shall see. I will announce ahead of time, though, to let you all know. But we're aiming for about a month, at most 2, for our first discussion. But here we are today to tell everybody about this incredible series. So what I'd love to do is have our quest group ask questions of Janny. And if you guys have questions over there in the chat, we will go to you as well. When I see some questions over there, I will highlight your comment, specific questions about Wars of Light and Shadow. Remember, even if you've read it, please do keep them spoiler free. And our Janny will be answering all these questions, and we'll be having contributions from the quest group as well as we discuss this series. So I'll just begin, Janny, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Would you please tell us, I know there are 11 books in this series, and that the 11th is in its final stages of editing. I think you've even finished it. You can address that. But tell us about the, and before I do that, I need to do one other thing. Sorry, I'm very forgetful, but you will be telling us about the different arcs in the series in a moment. But first, I have another exciting thing to tell you guys. As advertised, we are doing a giveaway of book 2 in the series, which is actually really books 2 and 3, right? And it is arc 2 of the series, and it's Ships of Merior. Thanks to the generosity of a viewer, some of you may know Chibipo, who is active in our community, and I believe is here in the chat. Thank you so much, Chibipo, for this generous offer to have this giveaway. This book was supplied by Chibipo, and this is going to be something that anyone who wants to enter the giveaway, all you need to do is leave a comment, not in the chat, not in the live stream chat, but in the video chat, which you can do any old time. So yeah, leave a comment, leave a book emoji. How about that? Leave a book emoji if you want to be entered into the giveaway. All right. So everybody who wants to be entered for a free copy of Ships of Merior, and it is, by the way, a lovely hardcover copy. It is slightly used, so it has been loved, but it is in pretty good shape. And so if you'd like to be entered in that, please leave a book emoji in the comments of the video, which I think you can do now, or you can do after the live stream, either way. And then when we have our discussion of Curse of the Mistwraith, we will do the drawing for the giveaway. Everybody's entered. And let's say you have a week or so past today. So next Sunday, whatever the day is then, what is that, guys? The 6th, the 5th, something like that?
I think it's the 6th.
Okay, that'll be the last day to enter the giveaway. All right, so enough from me. You guys ready? Janny, thank you so much for being here. And please do tell us about the arcs in the series.
This book was conceived many decades ago. I put probably 3 decades of planning before book 1 was ever printed. And I submitted book 1 as a finished volume, basically so that I had everything in place. So the arc system was necessary because each phase of the series uncovers another set of depths, and it's going to rearrange the markers because your vantage of what you are seeing will change. So in fact, after any arc, if you went back and looked at events in volume 1, Curse of the Mistwraith, you would see a whole different set of tensions, a whole different set of stories, a whole different set of conflicts. Because basically when you come in, you only know what the characters know, and you don't know who's got what moral high ground. You might see a faction in action and assume that they're this or that, but they may be anything but. So the arc system pretty much says volume 1, arc 1 sets the stage, introduces you to the world, and maintains pretty stiffly the character's perspective. But between the lines or straight out in the open, all the other perspectives are there. So if you look back at it, suddenly you go, oh my gosh, how did I miss that? Or how did my assumptions lead me astray? And I thought this was Europe, or a fantasy that was set in Europe, or this was, none of that is true. So arc 2 basically takes the world and deepens the characters, deepens the conflict, opens up your vantage so that you can become more invested, and you start to see a little trickle that things may not be quite what they seemed. The third arc really starts to kick it wide open because it raises it to worldview. Now you see where the factions are coming from. Now you see how the contention of power is happening worldwide. And it begins to hint at the layer underneath, which is arc 4, which stages for the mysteries, because they're very much interactive in this world. It isn't like a gaming fantasy where it tells you how all the rules work. There are many entry points to access magic in this world, and they all access the same system or column, and it's basically based on physics, resonance. So when you step into staging for the mysteries, what you're going to begin to see coming into emergence, but not, you won't see it act, are the elder powers, and that is arc 5. And what's going to shock you is the elder powers were there all along, but very great power walks very, very softly.
Awesome.
And so you're going to get the bottom and the top blown out of your assumptions. Each arc is going to blast it open, and each arc will carry the story from a sort of gear back because you're starting from another point to raise your vantage. So each arc is sort of one story, but each volume splits into a section of that arc. So there will be a build and a midpoint at the arc center, and then a finale. So the second half of that arc, things are going to accelerate very, very fast. So don't let it throw you that things are slowing down. It is the arc structure gearing back. Think of a bicycle, because you're going to climb another hill and have a higher vantage, climb another hill and have a higher vantage. And it's all going to make sense. But I do not cliffhang you. Each book has a pause point. Each book has a halfway point where the ground is going to shift so that what you thought you were seeing will change. And that structure carries each arc. It also carries series wide. So mid-series, mid-arc, mid-third arc, Peril's Gate is the tipping point for the series. That's where the convergency of the entire thing starts to come together, and it will accelerate as you finish the latter volumes.
Brilliant. That is a wonderful explanation. Speaking of bottom and top, I want to show everybody what I'm wearing.
Oh.
Which is from none other than Janny herself. So there's a warning for everybody.
Yeah, well, that book's already written, so you might already be dead. Last chance.
That's a T-shirt that Janny was giving away at ICFA. I think AP, you probably have a copy of this T-shirt as well somewhere. In your
I
home.
have one.
And Jimmy, you have one? Okay, cool. Next time we'll all wear them like a uniform. Yeah.
Yes.
There are a few left. Johanna, just kick me an address and I'll send you one.
Oh, thank you.
I only have one size left, so it's down to a extra large. I think one size fits all, but
That'll be perfect for Joanna.
I'm
Yeah.
5'1", so
She's massive. It's massive. Extra large is actually too small for her.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you so much for that explanation, Janny. I really appreciate it. So let's go to our questions. And by the way, everybody, AP is a bit under the weather, so he is going to refrain from asking as much, but he will chime in when he feels like it, when he's inspired. You never know when the fireball's coming. So, but we're going to go to questions from Jimmy and Joanna. So, Jimmy, would you like to ask the first question of Janny?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a no spoiler stream, so I'm not going to get into specific details. But Jenny, hearing you talk about the arc structure and even the way the books have halfway points, I've read Curse of the Mystery, so I can already start to see like the halfway point that you talked about, and then the fitting conclusion to the book without a big cliffhanger. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the way that you wrote Curse of the Mistwraith is the fact that the chapters are almost divided into 3 sections. Like you have the main chapter, and then you have the follow-up, or maybe it was even prior, but there's like almost like mini sections following chapters. And it's not a structure that I'm familiar with, and nothing that I've seen really anytime before. So can you talk a little bit about that decision and structuring the chapters in that manner. And maybe you could also describe it a little better than I just did, because I found that to be fascinating. And it actually, it really caught my eye, like when I started reading Curse of the Mistwraith, and I liked it a lot.
Well, I did an awful lot of reading. And as I was planning these books, I'd already pretty much read the library. I mean, I started planning these books when I was 18, even though the first book did not come out until way, way, way decades later. So the structure was designed because everybody's read these multi-viewpoint epics, and you hit sections that are really boring, but certain information has to come across.
Yeah.
So I designed a major chapter and 2 follow-up segments, and then 3 little one-liners that advance the action where you're not looking, so that you get the worldwide picture in a snapshot, and they're used for either a backwards look at something that just happened or a response to what just happened in the major chapter, or it's setting the ground for what's coming up in arcs in the future. So no thread is really dropped. So when I fill out a spreadsheet of simultaneous action, I can see where the gaps would fall. So the second thing is the way the timing of this book works is different. I'd read enough fantasy to absolutely hate that we follow these characters for 6 months and then we backtrack the timeline to 6 months prior and we follow these characters until everything is current. I hated that because our world operates in simultaneity. And there's a reason for simultaneity being very important that will come up later as the other structural things that are going on in these books become apparent. So this was a way for me to make all of the action either be carrying forward or be simultaneous. You never get the major flashback where we pause and go back a month or pause and go back 6 months. You might have a brief flashback where a character is remembering something, or there might be a historical note, but actually the action is simultaneous or forward. So that was the purpose of the arc structure also, was to enable me to fill in the gaps, focus on the things that had to be focused on, and just put a one-liner in there to keep it moving. And so that you had that sense of everything is happening all at once. That made problems because logistically, if you had to move an army from here to there, and you wanted to make it realistic according to the terrain, the weather, the time of year, the supply lines, trying to keep that simultaneity was very difficult sometimes for me to choose which character to show the viewpoint or how to advance what had to advance, which order to show the simultaneity in. The third reason I did it that way is the little one-liners are actually my buried tribute. I buried little tributes to authors I admired all through this. This one was a hat tip to Zelazny, who used 3 one-liners in, what was it, Lord of Light? One of his books.
Yes.
And he used those as a repetitive. It was sort of like a repetitive in between chapters. I said, this is freaking brilliant, but let's make it serve the story. So there's your answer on the structure.
Yeah. And you know, hearing you explain that out, that makes a lot of sense, because what would happen is I would finish a chapter, you know, there's a lot going on. So I would have to digest it, be like, okay, maybe that's it for today. But then I would read kind of the trailing sections and I'd get really interested because you would just have like a mysterious figure doing something somewhere else. And I'm like, whoa, what's that? And I'm like, am I going to get more of that next time? So it kind of led me to reading even more than I had planned for the day. And also I love hearing anyone praise Zelazny. So that's very, very encouraging.
So a quick question from the chat, Janny. We have a question from Paramita, and it is for forgetful readers like me who struggle with details in multi-POV stories, is there an online resource such as a wiki or a web page for previous books? And that question was answered partially, I think, by Chibipo, the Paravia wiki. But I think you also might want to mention your web page, Janny. Is that the case?
The webpage is huge. It's extensive. It has a frequently asked questions section, but you need to watch for spoilers in that one. The wiki is probably your best bet because Brian, who designed it, arranged it by volume. So by volume, you won't be spoiled. If you look at the wiki for book 1, and also the glossaries in the back of the book were arranged by volume. So the glossary will not spoil for the book that you were reading, but it will give you additional information. So when you start Arc 2's glossary, it sets the turf for the ending of Arc 1. So if you stay in the glossary in the book you're reading, you won't trip over a spoiler. We also have an interactive map. And if you click on it, sometimes it gives a historical note, and that is codified. So you can avoid a spoiler. Just read the directions before you click on things at random. I think that the software that was used for it died, and then it got revamped. So it may not be current. The interactive map probably definitely isn't current.
Okay. Where can they find the interactive map?
Everything is on my website, and I'm the only Janny Wurts in the world. Look up the official website, paravian.com.
That is true.
Have trouble finding it.
That is true in more ways than one, Janny. You are the only Janny Wurts in the world. But yeah, and by the way, everybody, the website is really cool. You can order a copy of the map as well for yourself. It comes in different sizes, and it's really a cool map. So that's all available at the website as well. So, Joanna, you have a question for the author.
I feel like, oh, neat. AP's showing the map there.
Oh, cool. Yeah, there it is. Awesome.
That's sweet.
I love the font on that map, by the way. Just want to mention that.
That's it's calligraphy, and I kind of morphed it out of an old manuscript that looked really cool. So that alphabet didn't exist in any of the calligraphy books. I just swiped it right out of a manuscript and then sort of adjusted it to work for the map. So yeah, that's my own writing.
I love that. Well, and that is actually related to my question, because I always feel like I need to bring this up every time I talk about your books, which is that you're an incredible artist in addition to being an incredible author. And I was curious because I love your artwork so much, and I love your writing so much. And I'm curious about how much it seems like it would be the obvious route to say that the words, the writing informs the art, but I'm curious if there's in any way art that informs your writing, and also related to that, how much you visualize the elements that you describe, because I know it for myself. I'm somebody who visualizes what I read quite a bit, and I felt like I was just very immersed in the visual descriptions of this world.
I've always been a bit of a dual writer artist. Visual is different than words. So if you have a concept, you can choose to translate it either way, and it goes differently depending. If you're going for words are a symbol that means something else. Visual is very direct. So the only way I can explain it is, to a writer, the end of a sentence is finished with a period. To an artist, that's a spot. So it's a different kind of a translation. The reason why I decided to illustrate this, crazily enough, was when I began to design this, I love Frank Frazetta just as much as the next person, but my character does not look like a brawny barbarian. I was really scared that I was going to get scantily dressed women and, big muscled males, all over the cover to please the truck drivers in the distribution system at that time. So I said, I'm going to really have to learn to draw well enough to do the artwork. And so, yeah, I visualized just about everything. And about when I was working on Arc 4 or the end of Arc 3, my husband, Don Mates, said, you've got a visual image of all of these places. You know what they look like in intricate detail. So he gave me a sketchbook, and he drew the title page saying Paravia Sketchbook. And he said, fill it up. So I've been doing pencil drawings ever since. And a lot of those have reappeared in the iconic amalgamations that the covers have become. I often will take something I drew in pencil and then turn it into oil paint later on. So yeah, there's probably some 50 drawings, plus all these color pieces, plus notes, plus scribbled on napkins. So yeah, I know what everything looks like. And for the people who like to visualize on their own, fine, pull the cover jacket off. Because to me, you only have one shot to see it as I visualized it. After that, any artist could do their own interpretation, and the more the merrier. But you really only get one shot, so why not?
Yeah.
Okay. A question from the chat, Janny, about a person, Scarlet Cloak, who finished Curse of the Mistwraith last week. Congratulations. And this person is waiting for their friends to catch up, and was wondering, are there certain book series that were inspirations for you while you were writing Curse of the Mistwraith? Any particular fantasy series that you felt inspired by for Curse of the Mistwraith?
In fantasy, not very directly, though there are some buried inferences for authors that I admired. But there certainly were signal influences on this series, and often they were not fantasy because my library didn't have fantasy. I mean, Zelazny was this massive discovery because there really wasn't science fiction and fantasy in the library. So I did discover Tolkien, and what Tolkien gave me was, oh my gosh, I can tell a story and it doesn't have to be in this world. That was so freeing. That was so incredibly freeing. It's like I'd read fairy tales, I'd read this and that, and the concept of you could break away from all of our mythological roots, everything, and create your own. So Tolkien was signal in that regard, but there's not much influence of Tolkien himself in the work. Two other writers besides Zelazny, for just being so original, were pretty signal. One was Dorothy Dunnett, who wrote the Lyman Chronicles, and she also wrote a Macbeth. And her ability to turn characters and surprise you and have collisions of belief systems or collisions of assumptions and turn things on their head, and her ability to set things in a setting so firmly that she was a historical writer. The people who are historians say you can read her books and you've read the history book because she was that careful with her details. So her style, her timeless ability to put you in a setting that was not this one, her intricate ability to handle a plot with world-spanning backdrop, but still focus on the characters. So she was a big influence. The other one was a book by Morris L. West called Summer of the Red Wolf. And it's not like the rest of Morris West's books, which I read in my dad's library, so that's where I would have stumbled across it. And this one I found in a used bookstore because his readership didn't like the book much, so it ended up in returns. So it was everywhere. You could get a copy of that for $1. What impressed me about that book was it was about a man in midlife crisis who went to get away from it all into northern Scotland. And the entire story turned upon two characters met each other and it impacted their lives both in incredibly negative ways because of the assumptions they had about each other. And it ended up shatteringly tragic.
Wow.
And when you looked at it and you finished it, you would be shaking because you say, there, but for the grace went I.
Yeah.
So I thought that feeling of if you knew the other side, or if people communicated clearly, or if they understood how we influence each other subtly and not so subtly, because we go from being influenced off our own assumptions and how dangerous that is. So that was a pretty signal book for me. So is Joseph Kessel's The Horseman. I'm not talking the movie, I'm talking the book. Yeah, I read a lot of fiction up and down the scale everywhere before I finally settled, and fantasy and science fiction is now absolutely my first love.
All right.
Well, Johnny, it's been very interesting to hear you first talking about Frazetta and that sort of stereotypical image of fantasy, and then these influences that were about first impressions often being wrong and judging people on a stereotype or this sort of projection. And one of the things I would point out to people is that I think that's a lot of what you play with in your writing, this how people can make assumptions. And it's something you point out very, very clearly in the prologue of The Curse of the Mistwraith, that you are signaling, right, here are these things. You might think they are stereotypical. You might think these are tropes of the genre, but you have to be paying attention. So I wanted to thank you for doing this sort of writing, because it's something that both challenges me and I enjoy so much, but also I think shows the versatility of understanding what it is that you are doing when you're writing. So if there was an aspect of that sort of tropes and subversion of tropes and how you wanted to play with that you can discuss in a non-spoiler way, I'd be grateful to hear anything that you had to say.
Well, I can talk about it as a non-spoiler because the book, I'm sorry, but it's going to set you up for fall. it's going to set you up for major falls. And often fantasy doesn't do this. It tends to define itself as black or white, good or evil. And some of it doesn't, but it still has a way of letting you know, I'm going to turn this trope upside down. I wanted to slip it under your skin. So I stuck a whole lot of things that appear very classical in volume 1. And when you get through it, it's going to be anything but. And it's going to kick your butt, because I think in real life, if you actually have an assumption turned upside down, or you encounter the tragedy of where your thinking led you astray, it's hard to admit you're wrong. And people handle that differently. Some can never admit they're wrong. Some people double down and dig deeper. Some people go into a turmoil and don't know what to do about it, and they kind of sit there and bibble until they figure out where to go from here. And other people are able to assimilate that change and stride forward. So I wanted the whole range of that to happen, but I also wanted it to happen to the reader. And so I get a lot of DNFs on this books. I know I do, because they aren't going to do what you want them to do. They're going to do what they were designed to do, which is upset your apple cart and make you reassess. And some people think that's really cool. Some people hate having their assumptions burned up and destroyed. And I wanted it to get you in the gut. So the style is made to invest you very, very heavily. So when it happens, you are going to experience that rough ride and that shift.
Oh. Wow.
And the other thing, one more thing I wanted to add to that is sometimes the hero in one scene is the wrong person to be in charge in the next one. It's like sending Patton to the peace table. So I believe that sometimes your talents are perfectly suited for one role and an absolute disaster in another. So that will unfold in the course of this series too.
Wow. So a quick question, I think, from the chat before we let the Newtmon ask his next question. But the question from the chat actually is about audiobooks. Will there ever be a complete audio presentation of this series?
The rights are owned by HarperCollins Voyager in the United Kingdom. Kick their butt. Because numbers talk, and the way this series has found its way over the years, there was never a giant smash hit book that came out. It's been accumulating its followers in slow increments, and now there's enough readers to support that audio. But the publisher's got to be knocked off their toadstool of thinking it's not worth it or whatever they're thinking. But I can't get the rights back. I have tried.
Okay.
So make noise, because I would like nothing more. My hope is they now have a policy that every book coming out has an audio version. And I'm going to try to start a war saying, don't do volume 11, the finale. Do volume 1 instead. Because that will show you, that will demonstrate that there's a following for this. So I don't know if I'll win that fight, but you guys can help.
We can help, everybody. You can tweet to HarperCollins UK. You can write them a letter, an email, whatever you like, but let them know if you're interested in an audiobook of the series. They need to know that there is a demand. So
that, and tell your favorite audio company, because they'll back pressure to the publisher too.
Okay, very good.
Well,
All
Philip,
right.
before you move on to letting Jimmy ask a question, just because Johnny's been answering a lot of our questions, I thought of a question for you, Joanna, and Jimmy. So you know that 3 books is a trilogy and 4 books is a tetralogy. What's an 11-book series called? Because I know Johnny and I know the answer to this.
This is a question that only Lord Fireballs would ask.
I mean, I just want to Google it, but I'm not going to. An 11tology, I guess. I'm not sure.
Not quite. Philip, do you want to have
you
a
didn't
stab?
ask me. You didn't ask me. So
Now he's asking you.
notice how Joe Ariel tries to slip away from that question.
I'm going to let you guys off the hook, because one of the things about the arc structure that I've never really advertised, but it's true, arc 1 and 2 is 3 books. They fit very nicely as a trilogy, because the hammering finish on arc 2 really puts the cap on arc 1. 5 books in the middle, 1 story, arc 3, raising it to worldview. But the last books 1, 2, 3. Arc 4 and 5, which is single, is another trilogy. And if you read them in blocks like that, if you think of it, so yeah, this arc structure thing, it slides all over the place because I've buried all kinds of leads in it. But yeah, so think trilogy, 5 books trilogy.
All right.
So that'll save you.
All right, Nudman, are you ready to ask your question?
I am. We talked a little bit about your publisher, Janny, but also my ears kind of perked up when you said that you've been writing this for about 3 decades.
3. It's been planned for 5.
So, I mean, that's incredible. And, you know, I'm very curious about how that, like, whenever you're working on something, you know, for this long, and then it comes time, I think 93 was when Curse of the Mist Wraith was published, if I'm correct. At what point you say, okay, I'm ready to go like shop this around? And what was that process of first getting published? Because I'm sure you went to them and say, hey, I have this book, but I also have 10 more. So how does that work whenever you approach a publisher with such a grandiose idea?
I started out with this idea in 1972, 73 in there. And it was really a pretty simple idea to start with. I wanted a story that had a conflict where evil and good were not what you assumed going in. And there, but for the grace of God, if you didn't know the entire story, you might have sided with the wrong person. So that was the seed concept. And it began to evolve very fast because I wanted to set it in a world that was different than ours. And I wanted to set it to put humanity on a different evolutionary track than the one that we're stuck on, where might makes right and where certain things are happening. I don't want to go into spoilers, but I wanted to write an alternative. In a way, it was an answer to Ursula Le Guin's challenge, show me a different system. So I created a different system that put humanity on a different track. And it will come to full flower in Arc 5. And I realized very quickly that I couldn't just write this. I had to take the time to learn my craft as an author. I had to develop it so that it was credible, believable, and solid. So every single location in this world had a history. So I wrote thousands and thousands and thousands of years and eras of history before this and after this. And that was all developed as I was drafting the original story. It took me 17 tries to get volume 1 the way I wanted it. So while I was doing all that and learning to draw, I was writing other stories because I realized I could not go to a publisher and do this huge honking thing and not have it interfered with. I'd have to establish my credentials first. Because I didn't want them editing something in volume 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 that was going to be a disaster for the 5th arc. So I waited until I had the chops to go in, and I presented the first book and sold it with the projected, but I did not contract past Arc 3. Then I contracted to the finish. And in a way, the fact that it's had such a spotty history, I've had multiple publishers, it's been crazy. It's been so many changes of editors. I've mostly been left alone. So that plan stayed very intact. It hasn't been messed with. So I didn't even try to sell it until 30 decades down.
Wow.
So it would be as solid as I know where I'm taking this. So it wouldn't sprawl and get a loss of control and fall all over the place.
Wow. Just for a little context, folks, since Janny conceived of this series in 1972, that means it's as old as I am.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the fun part is that I have all these satellite stories that, little shorts where readers took an assumption and were so wrong. I just had to write a little short historical piece to correct course. So there's lots of room to play that will not even repeat the same characters in this series at all. I can take whole other sections, but my other works do not connect with this. This is not a connected universe. You can read any of my other works and they're totally separate.
Speaking of which, there is a question from Scarlet Cloak about whether there are plans of a release of a collection of your short stories set in this world in one physical tome.
I need to get the finale of this book done first. In my mind, there are things I would like to do that would do that. I would like to have a set of shorts. Actually, I've conceived of 3 different sets of shorts bound as one, but I have to see where I fall when this is done, you know. Depending on that last volume, you're only as good as your last book. So if there's support, whether I have a major publisher, whether I do this on the side on my own, but yeah, I'd like to play with that. I just got to see when I come out the other side of this, where I stand. And I also have other projects that are not related to this at all that I'd sort of like to write also. But no, I may not be done with this universe. You probably will see more.
Excellent.
Right now on my website, there are e-copies, ebooks, and those will eventually be compiled with new material to create that. But I have to see how it falls together.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think it is the turn of Joe Ariel. Watch out for that silent H.
Wonderful. So I guess my question, you were just answering questions about the publishing process and how you had to prepare for that and get your credentials together and the in-depth design plan and history that you worked out for creating this world and going through 17 drafts of the first book. And so I'm curious though, because if knowing the first book came out, I think Jimmy, you said 93. That's correct.
I believe so.
And I was alive in 93. I was a bit younger, but I do remember that year. And I'm just thinking about how much the world has changed since then. And I'm curious if any conventions in fantasy have maybe affected the journey of writing these books, or just how the whole journey, the process, the journey outside of publishing specifically, but just to you personally as an author.
I think there's 2 things that carry through when embarking on a long form work like this, where it's designed to be a long form work. It didn't just happen that way. It wasn't because the money was great, because frankly, it hasn't been. It was designed to be a long form work. And 2 things emerged. One was, I never could have imagined the accelerated rate of change that would have hit the publishing industry. And it has tripped and bollocks this series every chance it could get. So threading through all these changes where massive mergers happen, editors come and go, that's very difficult. The second thing that I wanted in this series, and the good part is, I did get old enough. I did mature as I wrote it. I wanted the series to be timeless, so you could read it for just what happens when you're younger. When you read it each decade, as you age, you will see a whole different story also, because life perspective carries into it. And I see a lot of young series writers starting out now. They're all gung-ho and enthusiastic, and they wallop into a huge long series. And I think, wait till you hit midlife, or wait till you hit menopause, or wait till you're writing the 5th bar scene or the 6th where everything goes to heck. You pick all the low-hanging fruit. You write easy stuff. You write the stuff that's so forward and natural. Well, when you've been at it for your 5th decade in this design process for a long-form work, how do you keep it original and fresh? And how do you account for what was important to you in your 20s, 30s, or 40s may not be the same as in your 50s. So you have to mature. You have to choose a story that's going to mature as you mature, or you're going to really screw yourself. And it will get very hard to write. Okay. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah. I just was really curious about that. And I just love hearing your wisdom about that kind of thing, because it seems like you've not only thought things through, but you're always willing to grow and change too. That's something that you've talked about a lot too in past interviews too.
You need to really think hard too, because fads and what's popular or what phrases are key changes so fast. So that's one of the complaints people have, is the style of these books. But the style of these books was designed to be timeless. It was designed not to hitch closely into whatever's happening here and now and the cool phrases or the whatever. I didn't want it to be faddish. And so making it so that it was timeless, sometimes a younger or new reader might feel displaced, because it isn't the hip world they're accustomed to talking in. So this was crafted to last. It
Yes.
wasn't crafted for the anti-intellectual movement that's going on, but it was definitely crafted to supersede any particular single point of reference.
Well, you mentioned Le Guin earlier too, and I love her essay From Elfland to Poughkeepsie, where she asserts that the prose is the story, and in fact, it is what creates the world. It gives the reader the sense of immersion in that world. And I was thinking of that essay when you mentioned how your prose is timeless, and I agree. It is the prose through which we experience that world, and I don't feel like I'm here when I'm reading your book. I feel like I'm in this other world, which is fantastic, and I think that's the sort of fantasy that I really admire. But we had a question from Francois, and I think it's a fairly easy one to answer. Does each book start with a prologue so we can have lots of prologue videos from AP?
It does not. That is the prologue, but you could stick that prologue at the beginning of every single book, because you'll be reminded of what you discounted in that prologue. And people often forget that prologue, and then they go back and they go, oh my gosh, how could I was told this was going to happen. I was warned that viewpoints were going to be slippery. So that prologue lasts the whole series, but it does finish with an epilogue. So there will be a bookend to that in the final volume.
If it makes people feel better, there is a video. I've recorded a video of the prologue, just discussing some general points, and that'll, I think, be coming out this week. And my plan is, even though there's not an official prologue for each book, to at least take maybe something from the opening chapters of each book to discuss those elements, because I always like looking at the early part of a book, just so that if someone wants to know if they want to read it, it's not going to be taking an element right from the middle and maybe spoil the moment up until then. So I like doing stuff from the very beginning. So I'm going to try and do that for each of the different volumes as we go through.
Fireballs cast, everyone.
For the record, the anti-intellectual movement has my support for one intellectual, and that would be Philip Chase. I am anti-Philip Chase. But apart from that, I am pro all the other intellectuals.
But that would be to assume that Philip is intellectual.
Well, he is the anti-intellectual. He's the nemesis.
He is the nemesis.
So, all right. Well, I cannot resist this question here. There's actually two cool ones in the chat. Actually, probably more, but actually, yeah, there are quite a few good ones. So really quickly, Janny, let's ask Maddie's question about, is there a specific work by Le Guin that you took inspiration from?
Not really. I mean, I read Le Guin. I read her Earthsea series while I was in college because it was not available in my library. I found it in paperback in the bookstore, and I found Donaldson about the same time. So I read fantasy as fast as I could get my hands, but I wouldn't say she was a specific influence.
Okay.
I absolutely loved a couple of quotes from her Earthsea trilogy because they struck a chord with me. And I was, of course, still in the developmental stages of these books. When Ged is looking at all the wizards losing their powers. And her comment in that Earthsea book was because they went for something else other than what they were. They changed their goal. They went for immortality instead of who they were. And so that really struck me as what happens to authors and creativity when we start aiming them at something else than just the pure creative process and our own, what do we want to say here? And we suddenly get influenced by the direction of what is happening around us. So the fact that Ged did not lose his powers because he kept his sights on the same values, that was a pretty profound statement to me.
That's so cool.
So I love Le Guin. I really admire her work, but she was not there for the signal inspiration of this. But, you know, stuff kind of comes through your skin. Who knows? You might see something.
Yeah.
She's definitely an author I admire.
So just to keep up with the chat, and then we'll go back to Nutman for a question. Joseph is wondering about the Paravian language in the series. Is it created or inspired by some existing language, perhaps?
Wow, that is going to be chopping straight to the heart of so much time planning that most people are not going to be aware of, but you might find it in the FAQ or filtered into some of the discussions. The Paravian language is not inspired by any Earth language at all. It was built from the ground up, and it connects directly to the power system in this world, which is physics, which is resonance. It is a language of power in that it shows the root source of everything, where it comes from, how it's built on, how it links together to other things. And each word has a form that can raise it to the emphatic. And actualized Paravian actually makes things happen. So if you take the language and you break apart the words, you will see a direct line from the source power to what you're ending up with. So it's very, very intricate. I've got stacks and stacks of notes as to how it works. I know how it works. It does not work like an Earth language that I know of. I never studied Sanskrit, but maybe it's something like that, because people say that has actual roots.
So everyone, our next chat will be in Paravian.
I can barely speak English.
Yeah, if you understand how the words are construction, you can actually see the emphatic versions or the smaller increments leading up to that, because there's prefixes and suffixes and root words that connect. So it all hitches together, sort of like a word is like a little train car, and it shows all of its values in that word.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you. All right, Jimmy, you're up. Any questions that you are burning to ask?
Yeah, this is something, Janny, that me and you discussed when we were at ICFA. And you were talking to me about your approach to dialogue and how when characters are speaking on the page, it's not simply just to fill time, but there's always a specific goal in mind when it comes to moving the story along. So I would love to hear more about your approach to dialogue, because I did feel like it felt pretty distinct in Curse of the Mistwraith.
I think that goes back to the craft of writing. And a lot of the internet that talks about the craft of writing now goes back to rule books, goes back to this, goes back to that, as to what you should do and what you should not do. And it often omits the intricacy of how language actually works. And some of my early people who were teaching me, helping me, critiquing my writing, one was a playwright. And he pointed out something very, very profound at the time. And he said, every time a person opens their mouth to talk, the action stops until they shut up. So make very sure that that dialogue is furthering what needs to happen, is delivering information between the characters, is not repeating something that both characters already know, and use narrative for the rest. So narrative technique is in a way being slighted in today's world, because a lot of writers don't understand when to use dialogue and when to use narrative. So I try to use the appropriate form to deliver the appropriate response. But a lot of people read this and say, oh, it's being shown and not told. That's not quite true, because you're not seeing something that's outside the character's viewpoint in the dialogue. But you might be seeing it between the lines in some of the material between that. So you have to balance what is the character actually saying and what does the other character see that they know that might not be in the dialogue. So it's an omniscient viewpoint, but it's very intricately put together. So I'm not head hopping here. I'm using very specific narrative techniques so that you can see there is a bigger picture, but you're not going to see past the character. The character is not going to see past his own viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Very cool.
All right. So a question before we get to Joe Ariel from Do Unicorns Read? Hello, Angela. And the question for you, Janny, is: have you ever been tempted to write in a different genre that's not epic fantasy or maybe even science fiction?
Maybe it hasn't really happened yet, but I do a lot of things on the side. Like I ride horses and I ride for search and rescue, and I've got a lot of wilderness experience. It's very possible someday I may dabble in thrillers, but I have a feeling that fantasy is going to kind of edge in there, or something's going to happen to it, because it's like trying to paint a landscape. The temptation wizard in it is just a little bit too strong. I've kind of always been a rebel that way, because the framework that we're given, the framework that we're told, the way that people say the world is, was never enough for me. It never, ever worked for me. Even when I was neck deep studying the sciences in college, I was running the telescopes for the astronomy department, and I could be running a telescope, pointing it at this or that feature just by the coordinates. And I might have 4 astronomy professors sitting there watching this go on with the students while I'm directing the telescope. And I'd go, what's that? Something goes by that isn't supposed to be there. And they'd say, oh yeah, we see it. The professors would. And I'd say, aren't you curious? And they go, we can't write about that. We can't pursue that. We'd be laughed out of the field. And so very quickly, as I pursued different areas of science, I kept seeing things that did not fit in the box, but they were not acceptable to the academic tradition of you have to repeat the results, or you have to. So I had to kick down the envelope and say, there's more to this picture than people are willing to accept.
Yeah.
So this is why I don't write mainstream fiction, or I'd have to think really hard before I set up to do it, because the temptation to slip things in there that I've seen by direct experience, but that there's no niche for, becomes too strong.
Okay.
So what do you do with people's boxes? How do you break the box apart without hurting their feelings, scaring them, or God forbid, treading all over their sacred cows? Fantasy gives you the perfect opportunity to do that.
Excellent. That's a wonderful insight. Just want to remind folks too, we have a lot of people here who were not here in the beginning. So just a reminder about the giveaway. Thanks to the generosity of Chibi Po, we do have the second book in the series, Wars of Light and Shadow, to give away to the lucky winner. To enter the giveaway, just put a book emoji in the comments of the video, not in the chat, but in the video itself. Leave a book emoji and you will be entered for the giveaway. And the question I can quickly answer for Scarlet Cloak is because that is when we will do the giveaway during our spoiler discussion for the first book in the series, Curse of the Mistwraith. And yes, it will be a live stream, and we will be giving away this book for anyone who entered the giveaway by leaving the book emoji during that discussion. So did I answer your question, Scarlet Cloak? I hope so. Yes. So that will be in roughly a month or so. I will make an announcement as we know when exactly it'll happen. So, Joariel, are you ready?
I can't not laugh every time you say it.
Sorry.
So I guess something that just kind of came up in my mind as you were talking about light. And earlier you were talking about concepts of light and frequency and time. I don't know, I kind of equate those together, but I think one thing related to frequency is music. And I noticed music playing a significant role in Wars of Light and Shadow. And I know we'll talk about that more in the spoiler chat, but I loved the moments with music. I was there for that. And I was just curious to see if there's a connection there. I don't know if you could say that in a non-spoiler way.
I can, and it will be fun because not too many people have dug into how things work. But music, if you follow and you play an instrument, you know that music creates harmonics. Mm-hmm. And that when you play a chord or you play bagpipes, that creates massive harmonics that are not actually in the instrument. So you're sounding more notes that are actually there, and you're sounding notes that are above hearing in those harmonics and below that you can't hear with your physical ears, but those harmonics are present. I mean, anybody who sat in a rock concert and had your chest practically explode from the bass, your chest is responding to the harmonic of that bass. So if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, sound has a frequency, light has a frequency, crystals and chemicals and atoms have a frequency. when you take two frequencies that are different and you sound them at the same time, you get harmonics that are neither one. You get something between, and you get something above, and you get something below. So there are many access points to how things work on this world. Resonance, harmonics, and string theory are huge.
That made me so excited.
I'm not going to leap in your face because I didn't sit down there and give you the rule book. You have to see it in action and see it work. So you will see scenes in the first book in this series that show you a pretty profound moment where magic is worked. But you see it from a character that knows nothing. You see it from the outside. That sequence is going to come back around again. It will come back around again, and it will come back around again in the final volume, and you will see it actually how it functions by working it through, not by being told. You will see it unfold. So the depths of that scene and what is actually happening to create that, it's a mystery in book one, and people go, oh, that's just hand wavy. Actually, it's not. Just you don't know enough to be able to see what is actually happening on the page yet.
Wow.
So expect that your viewpoint and your perception of what you're seeing is going to deepen, because the book will spiral over it again, and you will get it from a higher vantage and a lower vantage and a higher vantage and a lower vantage all the way through. So this book does not spread wide. It heightens and deepens. The same things are going to represent in ways that you won't imagine, but you'll go back to that first scene and reread it after you've done the final volume and go, oh my God, look at this. It was all there. It was all absolutely right there on the page, and I could not see it because I did not have the perspective in hand to understand everything.
Amazing. Wow.
That is incredible. That makes me so, so excited. I'm glad I kind of picked up a hint of that because I did think that. And I did have a music professor. He actually had perfect pitch, but he made this physics case one day in class, and it went way over my head. I won't lie. But he was making a case for, I think, he's like, if you take E flat 5, it's the color orange. I don't know. He just.
Yeah, it is, because the frequency of the light that makes that color that your eye interprets is all frequency and octaves. The light runs at a higher, faster frequency than the sound does. And then you get the subsonics, which are slower than that. There's your infrared, there's your radio spectrum. It's all the same spectrum. And so unilaterally, that same spectrum is all the way through this world. It's not running on different physics than here. It's just running physics at a different perspective, where what we can't measure with our machines still affects things.
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah, you can read it from that level too. But I'm telling you, there's not been enough readers to dig deep enough to see that. Very, very few. They usually just pass right over it. I needed a more varied following to really milk this series for what it's worth. That's one reason I'm so excited about these discussions, because I think the right kind of readers are going to come into this series and go, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff that we never even knew was there. Or they started it too young. You can't read this at 13. It's not going to work.
Yeah. Wow.
Janny,
It's like
I hate to disappoint you, but when it comes to physics and mathematics and all those sorts of things, I'll have to rely on other people. That is not my forte.
It's not AP, but you know what? You're going to see the thematic stuff. You're going to see the character interactions. You're going to see other things that are equally deep and equally important that could easily be overlooked. So your viewpoint is going to be absolutely stellar for this. It's going to be amazing. And I'm very excited for all of you being on board, but particularly I know what's waiting for you.
Yeah.
And I'm squirming in my chair. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Wow. It feels like there's this epic untrodden landscape that has a snowfall on it, and nobody's ever walked there, and you've created this place for us. So I'm really excited for this. Just to quickly answer Derek's question, we did talk about this earlier in the chat. Basically, it's the rights are with the publisher HarperCollins UK. So we are going to campaign and get them to release some audiobooks, particularly of the first book. We got to start there, Curse of the Mistwraith. And if anyone's curious about that, you can look earlier in the discussion on the replay. I
can add to one thing to this.
Sure.
These books were designed to be read aloud. There is an internal rhythm to the way the language was constructed. They will blossom in audiobook. And I'm not a professional reader. I can do GarageBand and I can erase things and make sure there's no mistakes. But there are short audio clips in MP3 right on my website you can download. So if you're curious, there are excerpts in print in various e-formats. So you can go kick the tires. So there are little bits of audio, little audio clips from each volume.
Josh is a fellow musician, music teacher friend, and has a wonderful channel. And Josh, I think you'll love the music parts of this book in addition to everything else.
Yeah.
I do want to mention a comment though, which is that I know that I have heard some readers here on BookTube say that they had to adjust to your writing style, Janny, for this first book. And I know I'm one of them. I did feel like the writing style was, like you said, you were going for more of a timeless essence in the writing. And I have to say, though, and I keep telling people this, I personally found that the reason I brought up the visual part, I did a video, and I'm not trying to shout out my video, but I did do a video on whether asking people out there in the community, are you a visual reader? Are you somebody who visualizes what you read?
Yeah.
And actually the inspiration for that video, it's actually one of my favorite videos I ever made, not necessarily because I thought I was a genius or anything in that video, but because I learned so much from people in the comment section in that video and how different people attend to different things in narrative when they read. But the reason you were actually one of the inspirations for me creating that video, because one thing I realized when I was reading, I think actually it was To Ride Hell's Chasm, is that when I started reading the book, I felt like there's something I need to like click with this writing style. There's a little bit of an adjustment period, which is fine. That's actually the case for me with a lot of my favorite fantasy. But I found that after a while, I started to look for the visual cues in your writing. Something in my mind just went to visual. And the next thing I knew, I was completely immersed. And it was almost like code or something. Something clicked for me. And the next thing I knew, I was just, like Philip said, in that world. I was completely immersed. And I felt the same way with Curse of the Mistwraith. I almost feel like there's a code in your language or something. Like there's some sort of secret code happening. And
it's not secret. It's not secret. It stems from a couple of things. First of all, if I tried to write this book in any other style, I got blocked. I couldn't write. It just didn't. It came out this way because this is the way it was meant to come out. Later, when I examined what was really happening, I can see why it wrote this way, because so many things happen between the lines. It's like, which character is talking? What do they know? Who are they talking to? What do they know? And what does neither of them understand at all? So there's layers that are moving with the interactions between characters. If you try to skim this, you're going to lean on your assumptions so hard that the story's going to become incomprehensible. It's going to buck you off. So I had to eliminate the skimmers. I had to eliminate them because the nuance of what is actually taking place on the page would be missed. It's like AP when you analyzed some of the stylistic things and how Malazan was written, why it works, but you had to pay attention. So the style was designed to get rid of skimmers. It was designed to get rid of people who were just reading to see what happened quickly. As I progressed with this and I actually ran across some very interesting research, I discovered that experiences, when they become extremely intense, slow down. That feeling of when you're about to be in an accident and everything slows down, that's your brain picking up more data to assimilate, and it warps your perception of time. So this style won't let you skim, and it will slow you down because your brain has to interpret more things. But also, when your brain slows down just that little bit and starts absorbing all those details and moves at a different rate than your everyday rapid fire dealing with life, the experience becomes searingly intense. And I write endings. The intensity that's built in the finales of the arcs, the finales of each book, would not stand on a skim read. So it's designed to slow your brain down so that that experience at the end stands with you for life.
Yeah.
And that's why so many readers who come off of my more linear books like Cycle of Fire or like Master of White Storm have trouble with this. So they come off the Empire series expecting a linear story. This is not a linear story. It is multi-level. It is a spiral that builds. So the style had to feed that, or it would have fallen apart. You wouldn't remember that searing detail, that searing experience in volume 1 that comes back around again and affects the character or forces them to grow. If you couldn't remember it in volume 9 or 10, then I've missed the boat. So the style won't allow you to bypass that stuff. So if you want a beach read or an airplane read, or you want to read while your kid's crying, this is not the book for that.
Yeah.
So I take flack for it, but actually the style is doing exactly what it's supposed to. And surprisingly, many of my readers who get the most out of them are not native English speakers.
Huh.
Oh, wow. That's
They have to
interesting.
read exactly what's on the page carefully. And they come out of this going, wow. So it's really knocked me, because the English speakers are the ones who tend to blow it off.
Uh-huh. Well, they might be used to something, a slightly different style, but I will say in testimony to what you've been talking about, the last 100 pages of Curse of the Mistwraith are absolutely seared into my memory. I mean, they are just absolutely, I don't want to say anything too specific there because it would be spoilery, but my goodness, there are very few endings to books that have affected me so viscerally. I would say that's a good way to put it. It was just a very, very I was gut-wrenching, vivid. That's not something you forget, that kind of reading.
That's it. Love it or hate it. If you finish volume 1 or finish any of them, you will never forget the ending of that book. But I don't expect everyone to click with this. I don't. But like Johanna experienced, there is a period where you become immersed, where your brain begins to catch on to what's happening and fall into it, because I wanted an experiential book. And I've been fortunate enough to live a very wild lifestyle where I did a lot of things. Direct experience. I mean, I went offshore sailing on small boats to write a scene that happens in Arc 4, to have a hands-on sense of what is this really going to be like. So I've done incredible things in real life, not just in an armchair. And I want to deliver that experience. What is a story but a gift of an experience given to someone else, or a gift of an insight, or a gift of something that isn't them, and then let them make with it what they want. So a lot of what I have experienced is on that page, and I want to deliver that.
Wow. Fantastic.
Wow.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt. I want to apologize for this. I'm actually going to have to cut it short, and I am so very sorry, because I'm greatly enjoying this. And Janny, you know how much I enjoy listening to you talk about your books and discussing it with you. So I do apologize, but I really am not feeling particularly well. So I am very, very sorry.
Thank you.
Don't apologize. Yeah, don't apologize. You're a champion for coming up at all.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. You've already added immensely to everything.
Absolutely. And everybody wish AP well, a speedy recovery. Lord Fireballs, best wishes.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Don't be too nefarious now.
I'm sad he's gone, but now I got more screen real estate, you know.
That's true. Fair enough. So Newtmon, a question for the author.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about Curse of the Mistwraith, but I would also just like to hear your experience. It sounds like you said, there has been a lot of hurdles in this series, whether it be editors, publishers, and everything else in between. So what kept your perseverance so disciplined, and I'm always very curious to hear about people's pathways to achieving their goals, because there's probably a lot of people out here listening or even reading your books that are prospective writers, and this is something that they want to do. And I think it's important to hear that sometimes the path isn't always just straight, and that it can have a whole bunch of different curves. So maybe you could speak to your experience and how you stayed so motivated and so effective, even though you had all those hurdles.
nothing, but nothing that ever gets accomplished in this world goes in a straight line. It doesn't happen that way. You're always going to encounter resistance. You're always going to encounter hurdles. You're always going to encounter the unforeseen. You're always going to encounter things that try to stop you, from people to circumstances to life events to shifts in publishing to whatever. And it goes back to learning to draw or taking a scientific mind and figuring out how to write, learning the craft of doing something. You have to push through those stiff moments, because the best part is what's on the other side. And I used to, or for a while there, I was doing some inspirational talks at conventions and stuff to help people who are creative find their way through blockages or resistances or problems where they couldn't seem to get around to doing what they needed to do. And the only thing I can say is every person on this earth was born original. Nobody has the same DNA. You were the only person, you're the only viewpoint you will ever be in history, in the future, ever. You are you. If you don't tell your story, nobody else can. The second point is the minute you step out of the pack and start doing you, the pack is going to try to drag you back in, because it's not safe to be a loner. So any creative person, I say, stiffen your muscles to being a lone wolf, because you're going to have to stride into territory that only you know the landscape, and your compass is your only compass. Nobody else can tell you where you're going or where you're going to end up. You are the master of your fate right there. And the only person who can quit this field, the only person who can make you give up is you. So if you give in to the pressure, or you give in to the mass pressure to conform and be like everyone else, or you give in to whatever the publishing trend is right now, the alternative, or the backside of that is your job is you're demanding that somebody else take their time to pay attention to what you did. So you better hone your craft and polish it until it's shiny, and continue to do that, because it is not your right to have their time. You have to earn it. So you can't do that sitting on one cheek being half-assed. You got to really go after it with both fists, both hands, and believe in yourself, because nobody's going to believe in you before you do. You are attracting followers, okay? Followers are not propelling you. You are dragging the boat, not the other way around. So you have to be prepared to do whatever it takes to believe in yourself and keep going, no matter how hard it gets, no matter whether menopause throws you off, no matter you lose your editor, you lose your publisher. I've had it all happen. And I said, I'm not going to have wasted half of my life and not finish this. That's just not an option. So if I finish it, then let history decide. But I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way.
Wow.
I think those are very encouraging and important words to hear.
So yeah, to anybody setting out to have your own voice, this is what it's going to take. And you're going to have to really hang on to that, even when that's my 2-penny lecture. When you want to give up, don't. Because then the world will lose out on that one of a lifetime chance to hear what you have to say.
I think it's worth more than 2 pennies. It's actually priceless. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, Newtman, you just asked a question, right? So,
yes.
Joe Ariel, how about you? Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of have a follow-up question to that. And I think, I'm sorry if it's a redundant question, but I'm just so inspired by your grit. And I'm curious if that was inspired by any particular person, either a parental figure, a teacher, or was just that always Janny Wurts? Were you always that determined?
I was inspired by bucking my teachers headlong, because they wanted me to conform to this or do this that way. And I always had other ideas. So it was a combination of getting the determination to buck the system. And my father was an inspiration to me, because he let nothing stop him. And he didn't bring me up. If I wanted to learn how to use a screwdriver or a soldering iron, he said, here, I'll show you how to do it. If I wanted to watch him fix an outboard motor, he would explain what he was doing. So he didn't carve gender roles. And I saw him tackle many things that he didn't necessarily have the knowledge to do, but he found the knowledge. because books exist. People have that knowledge. You can find it in the universe. It's out there. You just got to go where that knowledge is and see how it's done, and then take it from there. So at 16 and a half, 17 years old, I did Outward Bound. And this was the old style Outward Bound before they had a bunch of deaths and they had to milk it back. Outward Bound was developed because during World War II in the Navy, when ships went down, the 40-year-olds were surviving and the 20-year-olds were dying. And they could not figure out why this was happening. And they developed the Outward Bound program to break what you thought was your limit and force you to go beyond it, because that was the difference between the 20-year-old and the 40-year-old. The 40-year-old had lived through setbacks and wouldn't quit just because things weren't going right for them, or just because it looked hopeless. They'd hang on a little bit longer. The 20-year-olds figured, this is it, she wrote, and they're done. So Outward Bound took every limit you had physically, mentally, and stretched it beyond the breaking point, and essentially proved that that was an elastic restriction. You could break it and step past it. And usually you have to undergo a great stressful something to teach you that that limit does not exist. Outward Bound was designed in those days to break that limit. So I did that at 17 years old and realized nothing is beyond me. Every time I think I can't do this, I can. And I watched all the people around me hit their limit, have hysterics, literally break down, practically nervous breakdown. I can't do that. I can't go over that cliff. I can't. For me, it was taking a wireframe with a guy in it strapped in, and I had to rappel with one other person down a cliff, and all of our weight was being supported by 6 people on 2 ropes, two pairs of 6, 12. That moment when that wire cage swept my feet out from under me and we had to rely on our 6 people to stand on their training and not let us fall 200 feet onto some rocks, I was losing it, okay? So it taught you when you can trust, when you can't trust, to rely on yourself and to break those limits. So it spoiled me for college. It wrecked me, because here you got to go, oh, you think you want to do astronomy, or you think you want to do microbiology, you got to do 101, 102, 103, 202, 303. By the time you get to the good stuff at 4, what if you don't like that field anymore?
Yeah.
So I went to Hampshire College that allowed me to go straight into 404, read the textbooks, catch up, see if I liked it or not, and if not, do a U-turn. So that college was very unstructured. You created the structure of your education, but what it taught you was how to teach yourself to do things. It taught you how to learn.
Yeah.
So it was a natural progression of teachers who were idiots. Don't use those big words. You're in 2nd grade. Why not? Leave me alone. So from not listening to teachers to figuring out that I could do what I wanted by a father who didn't restrict me to a gender role, to Outward Bound that showed me I could smash any mirror I wanted to and walk straight through, to college that taught me how to do that in a practical way, to now, at this point in my life, hammering against prejudices that I'm not going to be able to break single-handedly and just going through it anyway. Do it anyway. Do it anyway. I get typecast for my gender all the time, and it's like, too bad. Do it anyway.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, even fantasy, right? I mean, at the time that Mistwraith came out, it was very male-dominated genre, and when people look back through the years and the decades, a lot of times the only people that they will bring up, happen to be the men that were publishing in the time. So,
actually, you're wrong, because there was a time when there was so little fantasy and so few science fiction fans. It was so fringe. Women were perfectly accepted because everybody who was reading that stuff was a social outcast. It was when it became mainstream and when the internet came along that changed. But the original people who wrote code in my day were women and men. It was both, because there were too few people with that kind of a mind. And so everyone got hired. Well, then they started outsourcing. And so then it got taken over. So I would say with Le Guin, she was writing before that prejudice was really entrenched. In the 80s, women were breaking that glass ceiling all the time. The difference between why the women from those time periods did not survive and why they're not remembered today is because the women were not going in the tradition of Tolkien, and that's where the numbers were.
Yeah, maybe that's more of what I mean.
Bang.
When we look back through the decades, a lot
Yes.
of times it's only Tolkien, right, and certain other authors. So it's kind of a cool opportunity to go back to something that was published a few decades ago and to say, hey, there's a
Now
lot.
it is a problem because the male dominated, go ahead and try to put out a big, thick fantasy as a woman. It gets harder. But if you ask anyone who's self-published right now, who sits across from a table, they'll tell you that writers who are over a certain age, I'm not going to put a number on it because I hate dividing generations. I think if your heart's good, your heart's good. I don't care what age you are. They will say, I get male and female readers, women who are sitting across the table looking at my books when they're over this age. And then it sifts out. It sifts out. The men do not stop when they're under a certain age because that influence, that misogyny crept in with the internet. It came in with 4chan, 8chan, Gamergate just torched it. So it's a new problem that was beginning to solve itself until something shifted. The internet kind of broke it. From my perspective, that's what I see.
I do remember the 90s. If I go into like a Walden Books or whatever, I do remember seeing a lot of female fantasy authors back then on the shelf. It is strange how much that's changed, but there also wasn't a YA fantasy section back then either. And I also feel like that might have shifted things around too. Yeah, strange the way that works.
Your Francois there just pointed out, Seiji Cherry, she won a Hugo. And yet she doesn't crop up. And her work is amazingly psychologically deep. It's incredible stuff that she writes. But yeah, so a lot of those women have fallen into obscurity. Women who were, Annie McCaffrey was the first one to make the Times list. Whoops. How come she's not mentioned in the same breath with Asimov and all those others? These were signal moments and signal work, signal advances in the field. So I don't get today, but I'm not going to stop my life because of it. And I'm not going to make too much of a kicking and screaming wham issue because I don't have time. I'm just going to plow right on through it. It's like the guy last week cleaning up after this silly storm. What, you think you can use a chainsaw, or you think you can move that big branch, or you think, well, yeah, get out of my way.
Yeah, we have some more. Patricia McKillop, Catherine Kerr, Catherine Kurtz, Carol Bird.
Yes. Patricia McKillop should have gotten a Grandmaster Award. Absolutely. Hands down. No question.
Lois Master Bujold won as well. So quite a few here, actually, that we should be revisiting here on this platform, I'm sure. We had a question about whether. A couple questions from Glenn here. Why Alice Bradley Sheldon had to publish under the name of James Tiptree Jr. back in those days. And so,
it's really skewing the discussion sideways because I don't want to make this about feminism. But yeah, she changed her name to prove that there was no difference, that under a male pseudonym, she could do anything. And she certainly made her point, but we're still slashing this issue now. If I had it to do over again, based on what I know now and the way things have turned, I would have published this under a gender neutral pseudonym in a heartbeat. And unlike some other of my peers, like Robin Hobb, I could not change my byline because I was trapped mid-series. I had to continue as I was. So if I thought that was going to be a hurdle to people seeing this work for what it was, I would have not cared about what byline it went under back then. But back then it wasn't such an issue. I didn't see it being a problem. And now I'm darned if I'm going to give up the turf.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to have the kind of readership that takes it apart, like Malazan or Lord of the Rings or Winds of Winter, any of those, George Martin, get the analytical people into this thing because there's enough material there to make it happen. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where female pseudonym, it gets a little hard because people don't take you seriously that you actually could write something that deep on that many levels. So you're asking great questions that I'm almost never asked because most people don't look that deep at an epic fantasy.
Yeah.
So was fantasy working differently from science fiction? Was science fiction going through a similar type of, I guess, cycle in terms of the gender difference? I think that's what Glenn is referring to there.
there wasn't an enormous amount of prejudice either way back then. You wrote what you wrote. One writer that's absolutely stellar right now is Sarah Zattel. She's almost unknown as a science fiction writer. She did a bit of fantasy that's good also, but her science fiction is just off the wall, incredible. Read The Quiet Invasion. And she's like off the map. Nobody's read her. Hardly anyone has heard of her. And she's brilliant.
Wow. Well, I think this is a wonderful thing that we're doing, is shouting out a lot of these authors who deserve some attention. But let's go back to questions for Janny. Either Jimmy or Joanna, do you guys have any further questions that you wanted to ask while we're here? We're going to wrap it up fairly soon because, like AP, I'm actually a bit under the weather myself.
Oh,
So
Oh,
I'm
no.
not going to last too much longer myself, but I want to give you two the opportunity. And people in the chat, if you're burning to ask a question, if we didn't get to your question earlier, go ahead and leave it there. But Newtman, do you have any final thoughts, questions for the author?
Not in a non-spoiler fashion. I'm sure I have plenty of questions when it comes to spoilers. But no, I appreciate the opportunity though to get to know you better, Janny, and also to hear about all of the work and inspiration that you've put into this work. And yeah, I almost want to reread Curse of the Mistwraith now.
same.
So, Joanna, do you
Yeah.
have any final thoughts for us?
Same here. I just want to say, while we're doing this non-spoiler, that it's just been such a pleasure to get to read a couple of Janny's books so far.
Yeah.
They've been just immediate favorites for me. And so I hope to encourage anyone in the chat who hasn't picked up any of her books to give them a shot, and just to take your time. As she mentioned, she did that very intentionally for the reading experience. And I think that the payoff is so high personally. So I'm so grateful to be part of this read along and to be getting the opportunity to analyze these books with this wonderful group. And thank you, Janny, and thank you, Philip, and thank you, actually, I should say Chaser the Bard and Newtman.
I'd like to mention a couple of resources that are out there for people who are just starting into this, especially if you are a skim reader or if you're coming in off of Empire. This is not Empire. This is off the deep end. There's a person whose handle is Laura Drangenchild, and she did a very in-depth discussion of book 1 in print on our fantasy. And she tells you, she doesn't spoil, she just says, watch out for this, or this will come around. In other words, she points up things that you would flash back across and miss. So I recommend that for people if you're lost or you want to have a little more measured. That is a very good research. She put a lot of time, a resource for you. The second thing is, if you're coming off of Empire and you want a more linear read, some of my other titles read much more smoothly for you than jumping in off the deep end at this one. Mm-hmm. If you read this one and you find yourself bogging down 1/3 of the way through to 1/2, and you go, why am I reading this? I'm really lost. I don't understand why this is here. There are 2 ebooks on my website. One is called The Gallant. It's a 100-page novella, and it covers one of the characters' back histories, and that character it features prominently in one of the chapters in Mistwraith, and it will give you an immediate connection to that character. It will give you a view of the story before the political system got broken, as things were getting shaky and threads were fraying. So it takes place about 600 pages prior. And there's another short called Child of Prophecy. Don't read these if you want the series to take you through it in a measured way until the correct moment. But if you're struggling and you can't connect with the characters, those little shorts might help you. Just be careful when you talk to the other readers, because you will be seeing things from a different angle than the story presents at that time.
Great. That's a very helpful tip.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. You're getting a lot of thank yous from the chat. Thank you, chat, for showing up for this. I will reiterate one more time for the giveaway. Thanks to the generosity of Chibipo, we are giving away Ships of Merior, books 2 and 3 in the Wars of Light and Shadow. To enter the giveaway, just leave a book emoji in the comments of the video, not the chat, in the video itself, which I think you can do now or after it posts. So please leave the book emoji if you'd like to enter to have this lovely book in your collection. And thank you so much to AP, who is no longer with us, but was here for the duration, most of it. He had to leave in case you came late because he's under the weather. But thank you so much, AP, for coming. Thank you, Joanna and Jimmy, and thank you for putting up with my silliness. But this quest group, we have to get a little bit better here because I'm under the weather, AP's under the weather. We gotta get strong here for this quest.
We need a healer.
We need a healer in the quest group for sure.
One thing I'll add for your giveaway, just a quick note. All of these books in the first half up to Peril's Gate provide you information that looks back at the other events, but you're going to get information that builds on book one. So if you say win the giveaway for book two and you just want to start reading there, use the glossary. It's possible. You'll swim a little bit. What I find with that when I say run across our readers that I started at book 5 or I started at book 2, they always go back and read book 1 because the events as they happened are different than what is presented in the second or the third or the fifth book. So don't be afraid to kick the tires a little bit, or if you find one used and you want to just look at the style, if you go back to book 1, it's not going to be what you thought it was either.
Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Well, there's some hints as to the richness of this series. We will be having our spoiler discussion of Curse of the Mistwraith. In approximately 1 month, I will make an announcement about it, and I am so very excited. And most of all, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Janny Wurts, for being here today and for sharing your wisdom with us and for generating so much love in this community. For this genre, you are a one of a kind, and I'm so excited to be reading your books.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's really my privilege to be here. It's a rare opportunity for me to see you guys starting at book 1 and watch the layers be peeled off. I'm going to be absolutely sitting here with a gag in my mouth. So it's my pleasure, always.
Nice.
All right, everybody. Until next time.
Keep turning the page.
You always get the